He's read to Mr. Vesco is a criminal, and he ought to be tried in the United States. We do believe he's a United States citizen, but he is claiming to be otherwise.
We told the government of Cuba that we are interested in getting Mr. Vesco back in the United States, as there are pending charges against him in the U.S.
In the annals of financial infamy, one name stands out as a symbol of audacity and intrigue: Robert Vesco, a man who scaled the heights of wealth and power, only to plummet into a life of international fugitive status. Vesco's story is a roller coaster of ambition, deceit, and survival that spans decades and continents. From his meteoric rise in the business world to his dramatic fall from grace, Vesco's life reads like a Hollywood thriller. He outsmarted governments, outran law enforcement, and left a trail of financial devastation in his wake. This is the tale of a man who went from millionaire to wanted criminal, from Wall Street darling to Castro's prisoner. Buckle up as we dive into the extraordinary life of Robert Vesco, a man who defined white-collar crime and kept the world guessing until his very end. Born in Detroit in 1935, Robert Lee Vesco came from humble beginnings. The son of a car factory worker, young Vesco learned early on that he wanted more out of life than a blue-collar existence. Driven by an insatiable hunger for success, he displayed a keen business acumen from a young age. Vesco's first taste of financial success came in his early 20s, when he borrowed $800 to buy a small manufacturing company. Within a few years, he had turned it into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. This early triumph fueled his ambition and set the stage for his meteoric rise in the business world. By the mid-1960s, Vesco had set his sights on bigger targets. He began acquiring struggling companies, turning them around and selling them for profit. His aggressive business tactics and charisma caught the attention of Wall Street, and soon Vesco was rubbing shoulders with the financial elite. In 1966, Vesco made his most significant move yet. He took control of International Controls Corporation, ICC, a small defense contractor. Under Vesco's leadership, ICC grew rapidly through a series of acquisitions. His reputation as a financial wunderkind grew, and investors flocked to him, eager to be part of his success. But beneath the surface of Vesco's rising star, a darker current was brewing. His business practices became increasingly questionable, and his appetite for risk grew insatiable. He began to see rules and regulations not as guidelines to follow, but obstacles to overcome. As the 1960s drew to a close, Robert Vesco stood at the pinnacle of financial success. Little did the world know that his greatest coup and his spectacular downfall were just round the corner. In 1970, Robert Vesco set his sights on his most ambitious target yet: Investors Overseas Services, IOS, a Swiss-based mutual fund company with assets of $1.5 billion. IOS, funded by financier Bernie Cornfield, was already in trouble due to questionable management practices. Vesco saw an opportunity and swooped in, presenting himself as a white knight who could save the floundering company. Using a combination of charm, guile, and financial sleight of hand, Vesco gained control of IOS for a mere $5 million, a fraction of its true worth. It was a masterstroke of corporate raiding that would soon be known as the coup of the century. Once in control, Vesco's true intention became clear. He began systematically looting the company, siphoning off hundreds of millions of dollars through a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. He used IOS funds to finance a lavish lifestyle, complete with luxury homes, yachts, and private jets. The scale of the fraud was staggering. Vesco divested an estimated $224 million from IOS and its subsidiaries. Thousands of investors, many of them small savers who had entrusted their lives saving to IOS, were left penniless. The fallout was global. affecting investors from Europe and South America. As news of the scandal broke, regulators on both sides of the Atlantic scrambled to make sense of Vesco's complex financial maneuvers. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, launched an investigation charging Vesco with embezzling $224 million from IOS funds. The IOS scandal sent shockwaves through the financial world. It exposed glaring weaknesses in international financial regulations and oversight. Vesco had exploited loopholes and jurisdictional gaps to carry out one of the largest financial frauds in history. As the net closed in, Vesco knew his time was running out, but he had one more trick up his sleeve. With millions of stolen funds at his disposal and a network of international connections, Vesco prepared for his most daring move yet, disappearing from the face of the earth. The IOS scandal marked the end of Robert Vesco's life as a respected financier. From this point on, he would be known as one of the most wanted white-collar criminals in the world. The chase was on, and it would lead authorities on a decades-long globe-trotting pursuit. As the walls closed in on Robert Vesco, he prepared for a disappearing act that would baffle authority for decades. In 1973, with the SEC hot on his heels and criminal charges looming, Vesco made his move. In a scene straight out of a spy novel, Vesco boarded his private Boeing 707 at Jersey's Teterboro Airport. As dawn broke, the plane was already over international waters beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement. Vesco had slipped through their fingers, beginning a life on the run that would span continents and decades. His first stop was Costa Rica, where he had cultivated connections with local officials. Vesco arrived with millions in cash and a plan to stay one step ahead of his pursuers. He quickly set about establishing a new life, complete with luxury homes and a coterie of bodyguards. The Great Escape was a masterclass in evasion. Vesco had not just fled, he had vanished into a world of offshore accounts, false identities and diplomatic protection. He left U.S. authorities scrambling, exposing the limitations of international law enforcement cooperation. Vesco's escape marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. No longer the respected financier, he was now an international fugitive, a man without a country. But for Vesco, this was just another challenge to overcome, another system to manipulate. The game was far from over. It had merely entered a new, more dangerous phase. Robert Vesco's life as an international fugitive was a strange mix of luxury and paranoia. With millions at his disposal, he created a mobile empire, moving from country to country, always staying one step ahead of the law. His first years on the run were spent in Costa Rica, where he lived like a king. Vesco bought vast tracts of land, built luxury homes, and even dabbled in local politics. He cultivated relationships with powerful figures, including Costa Rica President Jorge Figueres Faria, using his wealth and charm to secure protection. But Vesco's paradise was always under threat. U.S. authorities continued their pursuit, pressuring countries to deny him safe haven. This led to a nomadic existence, with Vesco island hopping across the Caribbean. He spent time in the Bahamas, Antigua, and Nicaragua, leaving each location just as the authorities closed in. Despite being on the run, Vesco couldn't resist the lure of new schemes. He invested in everything from cocoa plantations to cocaine trafficking, always seeking the next big move. His most audacious venture was an attempt to create a sovereign island nation off the coast of Baja, California, complete with its own laws and, conveniently, no extradition treaty with the US. Life on the run took its toll. Vesco became increasingly paranoid, surrounded himself with bodyguards. He rarely appeared in public, communicating through intermediaries and shell companies. Yet, there was a certain irony to Vesco's fugitive lifestyle. While he had more money than he could ever spend, he was a prisoner of his own making. He couldn't return to the US or set foot in any country with an extradition treaty. His world, despite his luxury, was a gilded cage. As the years passed, Vesco's legend grew. He became a symbol of the untouchable fraudster, a man who had outwitted the system. But as we'll see, Robert Vesco couldn't run forever. Just when it seemed Robert Vesco's story couldn't get any more sensational, it intersected with one of the biggest political scandals in American history, Watergate. In 1972, as the news of the SEC investigation tightened around him, Vesco made a bold play for political protection. He arranged a secret $200,000 contribution to Richard Nixon's re-election campaign. This wasn't just a donation, it was a brazen attempt to buy influence and derail the SEC case against him. The money was delivered in cash, stuffed in a briefcase, and handed over to Nixon's financial chairman, Maurice Stans. In return, Vesco sought meetings with high-ranking officials, including Nixon himself, to plead his case and pressure the SEC to back off. But Vesco's gambit backfired spectacularly. The illegal contribution was uncovered during the Watergate investigations, becoming yet another thread in the complex web of corruption that would ultimately bring down Nixon's presidency. The revelation of Vesco's attempted bribe added fuel to the Watergate fire. It exemplified the culture of corruption that had taken hold in Washington, where wealthy individuals could attempt to buy political favor with impunity. For Vesco, the Nixon scandal marked a point of no return. Any hope of quietly resolving his legal troubles evaporated. He was now irrevocably linked to one of the darkest chapters in American political history. The Nixon connection also elevated Vesco's notoriety. He was no longer just a fugitive financier. He was a player in an international intrigue, a man who had tried to manipulate the highest level of American government. As Watergate scandal unfolded, Vesco watched from afar. His dreams of political solutions to his problems turned to ashes. The man who had once walked the corridors of power was now more isolated than ever. A fugitive not just from justice, but from history itself. In the mid-1970s, as international pressure mounted on Costa Rica to extradite Robert Vesco, the fugitive financier pulled off one of the most audacious political maneuvers yet. Using his considerable influence and financial resources, Vesco convinced the Costa Rican government to pass what became known as the Vesco Law. This piece of legislation, officially called the Law of Permanent Residence, was tailor-made for Vesco's situation. It granted special status to foreign investors who put significant sums into the Costa Rican economy, protecting them from extradition. The law was a masterpiece of legal manipulation. It didn't mention Vesco by name, but its provisions so precisely fit his circumstances that its intent was clear. Under this law, Vesco was granted permanent residency and shielded from extradition requests. For a time it seemed Vesco had found his safe haven. He continued to live lavishly in Costa Rica, thumbing his nose at US authorities who were powerless to touch him. However, the Vesco law proved to be a double-edged sword. Its blunted nature drew international condemnation and put a spotlight on Costa Rica's relationship with the fugitive financier. The law became a diplomatic embarrassment for the country. In 1978, bowing to mounting pressure, Costa Rica repealed the Vesco law and rescinded Vesco's protection status. Once again, the master manipulator found himself on the run, searching for a new sanctuary. As options dwindled and his list of potential safe havens grew short, Robert Vesco made his final fateful move. In 1982, he fled to Cuba, a country with no extradition treaty with the United States and a government known for its defiance of American authority. Initially, Vesco found a warm welcome in Cuba. He presented himself as a victim of US imperialism, a narrative that resonated with the Castro regime. Vesco lived comfortably in Havana, continuing his business schemes and even advising the Cuban government on financial matters. But old habits die hard, and Vesco couldn't resist the lure of a new con. In the 1990s, he became involved in a scheme to develop a supposed wonder drug that could cure cancer, AIDS, and the common cold. This miracle cure was claimed as derived from urine of pregnant women. The scheme caught the attention of Fidel Castro's inner circle, including his nephew. Vesco, ever the salesman, convinced them to invest millions in the project. But when the drug predictably failed to materialize, Castro's patience ran out. In 1995, Cuban authorities arrested Vesco for fraud and international crimes against the state. The man who had outrun the law for decades finally found himself behind bars, sentenced to 13 years in a Cuban prison. Vesco's final years were a far cry from the jet-setting lifestyle he once enjoyed. He served his sentence in a Cuban jail, his health deteriorating and his fortune largely gone. The once invincible fraudster was now just another aging prisoner. In 2007, reports emerged that Robert Vesco had died in Cuba. However, given his history of deception and disappearing acts, many remained skeptical. Had the great escape artist pulled off one final vanishing act, or had time finally caught up with the man who once seemed untouchable? Robert Vesco's legacy is a complicated network of financial innovation, brazen fraud, and international intrigue. His actions left an indelible mark in the world of finance, law enforcement, and international relations. In the realm of finance, the Vesco saga exposed glaring weaknesses in the regulatory systems of the 1970s. His ability to manipulate the markets across borders and exploit jurisdictional loopholes led to significant reforms in international financial regulations. The final chapter of Robert Vesco's life is shrouded in much mystery as his years on the run. In November 2007, the Cuban government announced that Vesco had died of lung cancer in Havana. He was 72 years old, a shadow of the flamboyant financier who once commanded headlines worldwide. Yet, true to form, Vesco's reported death sparked as many questions as it had answered. Given his history of elaborate deceptions and disappearing acts, many were skeptical. Had the master con artist pulled off one final trick? Rumors circulated that Vesco had faked his own death to escape his Cuban confinement and start anew elsewhere. Adding to the intrigue, no photographs of Vesco's body were released and his remains were reportedly cremated shortly after his death. This lack of physical evidence fueled conspiracy theories and kept the Vesco legend alive. The controversies surrounding Vesco's death were a fitting epilogue for a life lived on the edge of truth and fiction. Even in death, he remained an enigma, leaving the world to wonder about the true fate of one of the most notorious financial criminals of the 20th century.